Hi and welcome back to the channel. My name is Nick and today we are going to take a brief look and discussion at Bitcoin. A little bit of a different view, a little bit more of a different angle, all that kind of usual stuff. We are going to be taking a look at the charts. We'll jump into what's going on there and kind of what I think is likely to happen over the weekend. As I get into today's video, if you do find it useful and informative, smash that like button. I do appreciate that. If you are new to the channel, then why not go ahead and subscribe, tap the bell, select all the notifications, and in doing so you will be kept up to date with everything that we do here at Cheeky Crypto. Right, let's start discussing a little bit around what's going on with Bitcoin, right? So we have, of course, seen a very slow, boring kind of couple of days, about 24 to 48 hours to that effect. And we aren't really seeing any major movements with Bitcoin. Now, for the most part, this is pretty standard practice when it comes on a weekend. There's low volume. There's not really enough interest at the moment, specifically at this point in the bear market. This is obviously quite notable from many different kind of Discord servers, YouTube channels, Twitter, although X is actually a little bit more I guess, active or from a crypto standpoint than many of these other platforms. But generally speaking, search volumes are down low on Google, on YouTube, and so forth. And as such, you are finding that there's just a general lack of demand for Bitcoin and for cryptocurrency assets. This essentially fuels that move to the downside when it comes to Bitcoin and it comes to the altcoins, right? Everything when it comes to price action comes down to just two simple understandings, the supply element and the demand element, right? Supply and demand are absolutely everything when it comes to price movements. If there's an imbalance in the supply and the demand, we tend to find that price will be volatile or move in the direction of imbalance, right? So for example, if there is a shrinkage of the supply and an increase in demand, that demand is going to lift the price of an asset, right? Whether that's gold, stock market, or even a cryptocurrency asset. And so when we see that the demand is drying up and there's still supply out there, essentially price will naturally want to move on down. Okay, it's not as scarce for the demand that's out there. So ultimately what I'm kind of trying to explain here is that I'm still expecting further downside when it comes to the cryptocurrency space. And Bitcoin in the charts, if we actually bring this up here, you can kind of see that it's being kind of stagnant in this little range on our hourly chart. You can zoom in on this just a little bit further. You can kind of see how it's been going sideways, kind of stuck in this little area. And I don't think that essentially it's going to continue this way for a little bit longer. I don't think it's going to just magically kind of, drop to the downside or magically push to the upside, at least not right away. And so from our charts here, we can see that we still have some progression to go, right? We are still expecting moves to the downside. This hasn't really changed. We are, of course, looking at 26,180 to 26,398 or 26,400 approximately there. And that is the move to the downside. And I think a lot of the moves that we're going to be expecting to see are more than likely going to happen over the weekend when, or more specifically the Sunday, when we have the bulls and the bears fighting out for that closed position. We'll probably talk more about this tomorrow as we kind of get into that. Now, if I come back into the charts here, you can see that we've got a little bit of a move to the upside in the green side. Again, lots of people are shorting because that's the natural thing to kind of do here, kind of looking at the data in the charts. A move to the downside is the natural thing to kind of expect. However, the moves to the downside are limited. They are not going to just continuously go down. Once we kind of hit that 26,400, I would expect a significant bounce to the upside to occur. This move will be of substantial stature, where we'll go from that 26 to 27 range pretty easily. And then, of course, we'll have that final fifth wave move. Well, once we complete the fifth wave to the downside, that final move down in that little lower range, as we kind of tap into around that kind of 25,900, 25,800 range, that's going to ultimately be where we see a big, significant pump to the upside. Okay, so it's not all doom and gloom. It's not all moving to the downside, because once we kind of finish this off down here, the next big thing to expect is a very healthy three-wave pattern to the upside. Now, it can be incredibly healthy where we hit, 27.5 upwards, or sometimes it can just kind of fall short at 27K, wherever the resistances kind of are and the structures at those particular times. But for the most part, our expectation is that Bitcoin price is likely to see a significant surge to the upside in the later part of October. Okay, so we'll keep a close eye on that and see how it kind of plays out. Now, as a part of our daily time frame, you can still see that we have expected ranges of the 22,000 to 23,000. Again, there isn't enough demand to really stop this or prevent this at the moment. Now, that can change, and we might find ourselves in a more positive situation where we find that ultimately price will be held at a good support level and rally up higher because significant demand comes on in. Now, this may be ETF news. This may be something to do with Ripple and the SEC. There's so many different things that could cause a move to the upside to bring demand back into the space. But for now, because those are all kind of speculations and we don't really have any concrete data to kind of back those claims up, and we definitely aren't really seeing an influx of new investors coming in, chances are that actually there isn't going to be a huge amount of demand at the moment to prevent us from falling down into this pattern. Now, ultimately, the $22,000 to $23,000 range, this particular type of range is a pretty bearish situation. We don't really want to find ourselves in this particular pattern. This particular pattern of $22,000 to $23,000 would lead us down into sub $20,000 later. Okay, we'd probably bounce around 22, 23 up towards that kind of 28, 27 again, but it would be short-lived and would go back down to that 20K area. And so we wanted to, if possible, avoid this situation, right? We don't want to see, Bitcoin go down to $22,000 to $23,000 in this particular pattern. It can go down there in a different pattern, but this particular pattern would actually allow us to see a much longer and more significant bearish pattern play out. So we want Bitcoin to really rally up higher than 28,588. At least the bulls do, right? The bulls are going to be having that case put forward to rally up 28,588 or higher. In doing so, that will invalidate the idea that we move down in this bearish pattern. So we've got a lot to be thinking about here, right? We want to kind of be bullish on the market. We want the bull market to kind of, show its head in 2024, at least Q1, something to that effect, right? But I think realistically speaking, we probably need to see, Q1 complete before we really see any kind of significant surge to the upside. We want to see the Fed pivot, and we want to see, interest rates kind of start to decline a little bit in the US. This is going to be a big signal, I should say, for bleeding out in the market. This is going to be signaling that ultimately retail investors are at their worst possible situation. Liquidity has completely dried up. And essentially what that means is that the stock market, the crypto market is more than likely going to drop down a good 50 or so percent. As that liquidity is completely dried up and people are trying to suck out whatever they can to survive, right? When the Fed pivot, the economic climate is at its worst at that point. Okay, that's probably the best way I can articulate this. And so when we see that, that's probably where we're going to be finding that Bitcoin is going to be heading into its worst position, but also the opportunity where we find the bull market. Okay, because after the Fed pivot, once we have that initial push to the downside, that is the opportunity, right? Because I don't think it's going to be long-lived. We saw this in March of 2020 with the pandemic, right? We saw that move down, over, and we're out, right? And I think that's going to be at least something very similar to what we're going to find when it comes to the price action of Bitcoin in 2024. At least that's my hope and my ambition here, is that we do enter into a really strong bull market in 2024, okay? But it has to happen, in my opinion, after the Fed pivot. So it's going to be really interesting to kind of see how that plays out. Now, on a weekly scale, you can see here that we are kind of doing the standard stuff, right? Higher highs, higher lows with overlapping candle patterns will ultimately break on down. And so at the moment, we can find support in this low range, as you can kind of see just here. We can find support, but ultimately we are looking for that $20,000 retest. That $20,000 to $21,000 retest also happens to be a daily CME gap that I think is likely to be the area that price action is going to want to gravitate down to. And so that particular area is going to be the point of interest for many retail investors. How Bitcoin reacts at that level is going to be key going further forward. So we want to be keeping a close eye on things. Ultimately, I think the 20K area, 20 to 21K, if we can keep that as a good support level and timings line up with a move down into that range during a Fed pivot, I think that's going to be putting Bitcoin into a very strong position. And we're going to see altcoins, although would have bled out quite heavily at that point, in really strong positions for the next bullish market. Any projects that survive by that point, entering into Q2 next year, I think is going to do incredibly well. But let me know what your thoughts are on all of this down in the comments comments down below. I think, though, guys, I am going to wrap this video up right there. If you have found it useful and informative, smash the like button. If you're new, subscribe, and don't forget to join us down in Discord. Link is in the description below. Until the next one, though, guys, have a fantastic day.